At 30,000 feet, Flight 276 from Dallas to New York was smooth and uneventful. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers flipped through magazines, watched movies, or dozed off in their seats. Among them sat a woman in her late 30s, quietly tucked away near the back. She wore jeans, a plain jacket, and kept her head low, avoiding eye contact. To everyone else, she was just another traveler on a routine flight. But what no one knew was that this woman carried a past far more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. For most of the flight, she remained silent, gazing out of the window, lost in thought. A few passengers noticed her calm but reserved presence, yet dismissed it as shyness. The flight attendants passed by her row a couple of times, offering drinks and snacks, but she politely declined. Everything changed in an instant. Halfway into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 30,000 feet. Weather is clear ahead, and we expect to land on time in New York. Please sit back and relax." The announcement was routine, reassuring, but only minutes later, the same captain slumped over in the cockpit, his headset slipping from his head. The co-pilot shouted for assistance, and the cabin door was quickly locked down. Flight attendants rushed forward while the plane jolted slightly, causing panic in the cabin. Passengers looked around nervously, whispers turning into cries. "What's happening?" a man asked nervously. "Is everything okay?" a mother clutching her child whispered. The answer was no. The captain was unconscious, unresponsive to every attempt to revive him. The co-pilot tried to manage the aircraft alone, but his voice over the radio betrayed his fear. He was young, not as experienced, and the sudden emergency was overwhelming him. The turbulence outside only made things worse. Fear rippled through the passengers. Some prayed, others cried. And in the middle of that chaos, the silent woman finally stood up. She walked calmly down the aisle, her eyes sharp, her voice steady. "I can help," she said. The flight attendants froze. They looked at her skeptically. She didn't look like a pilot, just a quiet passenger in plain clothes. One of them whispered, "Ma'am, please return to your seat." But the woman didn't back down. She pulled something from her jacket pocket, an ID card. The crew's eyes widened. It was a U.S. Air Force identification, old but unmistakable. Her name was there, but what caught their attention was the call sign stamped at the bottom, Valkyrie. The whispers in the cabin turned into stunned silence. She wasn't just a passenger. She had once been one of the Air Force's most skilled pilots. The co-pilot, sweating and struggling to steady the jet, finally agreed to let her in. "We're losing altitude," he said breathlessly. "If you can really do this, we need you." Without hesitation, she slid into the captain's seat. Her hands moved across the controls with confidence, like a pianist returning to an old familiar song. The cockpit transformed from chaos into order under her command. "Air traffic control, this is Flight 276, she said firmly into the radio. "This is Valkyrie. The captain is down. I'm taking control." The controller on the other end froze. "Did you say Valkyrie? As in Colonel Sarah Hayes?" "Ma'am, we thought you retired years ago." "Retired or not," she replied, "right now, I'm the only one keeping this aircraft in the sky." The passengers had no idea what was unfolding in the cockpit, but they could feel the difference. The violent dips and shakes of the aircraft began to ease. The jet steadied, cutting smoothly through the clouds. Hope began to flicker among them. Still, the danger was far from over. Weather reports warned of crosswinds near New York, and the descent would be tricky. The co-pilot followed her lead, watching in awe as she issued instructions with precision. Meanwhile, in the cabin, people whispered her call sign, Valkyrie, a name that once echoed across Air Force bases, now spoken with reverence by ordinary travelers whose lives were literally in her hands. The landing approach was tense. Dark clouds loomed ahead, and the runway was slick with rain. The tower kept feeding her updates, but ultimately it came down to her skill. She tightened her grip on the controls, her eyes locked on the instruments. "Brace for landing," she announced to the cabin. Her voice was steady, almost reassuring. The plane dipped lower, slicing through the storm. Raindrops pounded against the windshield as she adjusted the flaps. The passengers held their breath, hands clasped in prayer, eyes shut tight. The tires screeched as they hit the runway, sparks flying as the aircraft bounced once, then again. For a moment it seemed the landing would fail. But then, with masterful control, she leveled the plane. The engines roared as the brakes engaged, slowing the jet down the slick runway until, finally, it came to a safe stop. The cabin erupted in cheers, tears, and applause. Strangers hugged each other, parents clutched their children in relief. The woman, silent for most of the journey, had just saved hundreds of lives. As she stood to leave the cockpit, the co-pilot looked at her with deep respect. "Thank you, Colonel Hayes. The Air Force may have let you retire, but today, you proved legends never really retire." She gave a small, almost shy smile. "I was just doing what needed to be done." Back in the cabin, passengers reached out to shake her hand, to thank her, but she remained humble, quietly gathering her belongings. She never sought fame or recognition. She had lived a life of service and sacrifice, and today was simply another mission she was destined to complete. As she walked down the aisle and off the plane, one passenger whispered to another, "We were flying with Valkyrie all along, and we never even knew." And with that, the mysterious woman who stayed silent for most of the flight disappeared into the crowd at the airport. But for those who were on Flight 276, her story would live forever, the day a forgotten hero revealed her true identity at 30,000 feet. The flight attendants hesitated, unsure if she was serious. For hours, she had been just another quiet passenger on Flight 276, sitting near the back in a plain jacket, hardly speaking a word. But now, with the captain unconscious in the cockpit and fear spreading through the cabin, her voice carried a confidence that stopped everyone in their tracks. As she stepped forward, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, worn ID badge. The flight crew leaned closer, and when they saw it, their faces froze in shock. It wasn't an ordinary ID. It bore the emblem of the United States Air Force. Her name was printed clearly, but what stood out most was the call sign stamped at the bottom in bold letters. Valkyrie. The cabin went silent. Passengers who caught a glimpse whispered the word, as if it carried power. And in truth it did. Valkyrie wasn't just a name, it was a legend. Years ago, this woman had flown combat missions across hostile skies, her skills unmatched. And though she had stepped away from military life, her training had never left her. Now at 30,000 feet, hundreds of lives depended on her. The co-pilot, sweating as he tried to steady the plane, finally looked at her with desperation in his eyes. "If you really can do this," he said, voice trembling, "we need you now." Without wasting another second, she stepped into the cockpit. Sliding into the captain's seat, she adjusted the headset and scanned the instruments with practiced eyes. It was like slipping back into an old skin, familiar yet heavy with responsibility. Her hands moved over the controls, not hesitant, not unsure but precise, steady, confident. "This is Flight 276, she said into the radio, her voice firm. "The captain is down. This is Valkyrie taking command." There was a pause on the other end. Then the air traffic controller's voice cracked with disbelief. "Valkyrie? As in Colonel Sarah Hayes? Ma'am, we thought you were retired." "Retired or not," she replied, "right now, I'm the only one keeping this plane in the air." In the cabin, passengers gripped their seats. The jet shuddered as turbulence slammed against its sides. The weather ahead was rough, and the co-pilot looked nervous, but she remained unshaken. Every move she made was controlled, efficient. She steadied the aircraft, leveling it out with a precision the passengers immediately felt. The wild drops and jolts calmed into a smoother flight. A murmur of relief spread through the cabin. Hope had returned. But the challenge wasn't over. New York airspace was crowded, and the storm ahead was growing stronger. The runway was slick with rain, visibility low. It would take skill far beyond ordinary piloting to bring the aircraft down safely. The co-pilot looked at her anxiously. "The conditions are terrible. Do you think we can land?" Her eyes narrowed as she studied the radar. "I've landed on shorter strips in worse storms and under enemy fire. We'll make it." She adjusted the flaps, instructed the co-pilot on specific procedures, and radioed for priority landing clearance. The tower scrambled to clear other planes, giving Flight 276 the runway. Inside the cabin, passengers whispered prayers, clutched loved ones, and exchanged fearful glances. A mother hugged her son tightly, A businessman texted a final message to his family just in case. Yet through the fear, they all felt something they hadn't before, a strange, calming trust in the mysterious woman flying their plane. The descent began. Rain battered the windshield, lightning flashing in the distance. The runway was barely visible through the storm. The plane rocked violently as crosswinds hit, alarms blinking across the console. The co-pilot's hands shook, but Valkyrie's never did. "Stay steady," she said firmly, adjusting the controls with delicate precision. "We're bringing them home. Brace for landing!" The flight attendants shouted as the plane dropped lower and lower. Passengers bent forward, gripping their seats, eyes shut tight. The roar of the engines filled the cabin as the wheels approached the runway. The first attempt, too fast, too unstable. The tires screeched and bounced, sparks flying as the plane jolted. Gasps erupted. For a terrifying second, it seemed they might overshoot the runway. But Valkyrie's grip tightened. With lightning reflexes, she corrected, adjusted, and brought the nose down again. This time, the tires connected firmly with the slick surface. The brakes screamed, engines reversed, and the massive jet thundered down the runway, slowing, until finally it came to a complete stop. For a moment, silence. Then the cabin exploded in cheers, applause, and tears. Strangers hugged each other, parents sobbed with relief, and flight attendants held their hands over their mouths in shock. The co-pilot exhaled heavily, turning to look at her. "You just saved every single one of us." "I don't know what to say." She unbuckled her harness and gave him a faint, almost humble smile. "Don't say anything. Just remember, always stay calm in the storm." When she stepped out of the cockpit, passengers reached for her, thanking her, trying to shake her hand. But she moved quietly, politely, with the same calmness she had carried since the beginning of the flight. She didn't bask in the applause. She didn't claim the spotlight. She gathered her bag, walked down the aisle, and stepped off the plane like any other traveler. But for those passengers, she would never be just another traveler again. She was Valkyrie, the woman who had stayed silent until the skies demanded her voice, the woman who revealed her true identity only when lives were at stake. And though she disappeared into the crowd at the airport, her story would live on in the hearts of every soul on Flight 276, the day a legend returned and hundreds of lives were saved.